Promised Consort Radahn is very, very hard. In this video, I'm going to try to help you defeat him and or no-hit him. Depending on your goals, you can either aim to master all of the tips I give you, or just some, such that you engender a balance between evasion and damage absorption that tips the scales in favor of ultimate victory. You can see in the chapter headings how I'm going to break up this video, but I'll be covering the build, the overall approach, and then a breakdown of each move, so definitely stick around and I promise I'll cover all of his moves in detail. Let's first talk about the macro approach to the fight. For me personally, I want to deal as much damage as possible as quickly as possible, and so I construct a build that's oriented towards that. In a no-hit context, I don't focus on damage minimization at all because any hit just ruins the run. For a regular playthrough, of course, you're going to want damage mitigation as an integral part of your strategy. For weapons, I prefer something on the lighter side. He's fast, and you need to move concomitantly fast, and that's harder to do with heavier weapons. But that's just a personal preference. I'm also going to aim to incorporate status affliction and posture breaking into my weapon selection, so I'm going to choose a swift weapon and put an Ash of War and Affinity on it to accomplish this. In my run, I used the Milady sword from the DLC, and I left the Impaling Thrust as the Ash of War, and I added a Frost affinity. He's weak to Frost and Bleed, so either of these will work. If you want to focus on status buildup, you can use a weapon that will enable you to get off a lot of hits in quick succession, like the Twin Blades as well. For talismans, you've got defense and offense. If you're going for a defensive build, you can use the Dragon Crest Great Shield for physical damage negation, and the Golden Braid, which you pick up in the DLC, for holy damage negation, as these are his two forms of damage that he inflicts on you. You can also use the Great Jar's Arsenal Talisman to increase your equip load, letting you use heavy armor without having to heavy roll. For offense, you've got a ton of options. I wound up using the two-handed weapon talisman, which boosts two-handed damage by 15%. This is also a talisman you pick up in the DLC. I also used the Ritual Sword Talisman, which boosts damage by 10% at full health. You can use, for example, the Blue Dancer Charm if you have a really low weight as well, but some of these other talismans I found to be more effective. For my no-hit runs, I also always use the Crucible Feather Talisman. This gives you a few extra iframes for rolling, but it costs you like a 30% increase in damage taken. Normally, I only recommend this for no-hit runs because it's not really worth the trade in a regular playthrough. But I actually might consider using it on a regular playthrough with Promised Consort Radahn specifically because of how much dodging you have to do and how much damage he can deal. But if you do use it, for sure offset that extra damage taken with the Dragon Crest and Braid talismans. It's definitely not essential that you use the Feather Talisman though, but just something to note. I also used the Shard of Alexander to boost my weapon skill damage, in my case the Impaling Thrust Ash of War. As we approach the fight itself, just kind of the 10,000 foot view here, in general, I feel like you want to dodge a little bit earlier than the visual cues would stimulate your impulses to do so. This is probably due to the size of his weapon's hitboxes, but just bear in mind that you should be fractionally faster with dodging than you might otherwise assume. I certainly found that if I didn't dodge sort of like microscopically earlier than my impulses told me to, I often wound up getting hit. So I do think there's something going on with his hitboxes that prompt you to dodge like just a little bit earlier, nothing crazy. You're also going to want to spend most of the fight dodging principally leftward. And we'll get into why, but this is mostly because of the triple slash. Being on his left is the best way to evade it, and in Phase 2, you also need to do sidewards dodging in order to evade holy damage that lingers in the arena. So, because of the triple slash, you might as well just dodge to the left in that phase as well. Other than that, it's a complicated fight, but it's one that you can just learn by learning the moves, and we'll dive into that next. Before I do so, though, let me just tax your patience very quickly. If you like this content, if you like guides and analysis videos and challenge runs, that's all of the stuff I make about Soulsborne games. So please consider subscribing. Also, leaving a comment and a like really helps with engagement, and this video took a lot of work, so I'd greatly appreciate if you could help me out with that. Alright, opening up the fight, this gravity jump smash is by far his most common opening move, but it is definitely not true, as I've heard in some places, that it's his only possible move, and that is evidenced by this example right here. He can do other things, including the gravity well and the double jump, so just be wary of that, but in 99% of the cases, it will be the gravity jump. With this main move, the dodge timing is surprisingly generous. You just hit dodge as he gets relatively close to you, but you have a fairly wide window on this one, much wider than many of the other attacks in the fight, so you can take advantage of that. Now we're going to dive into his melee moves in no particular order. The first one we're going to look at is the foot slam, which is often followed by a combo. You want to give a very slight delay to mirror his own delay and then dodge to the left so you're out of reach of the spikes and or prepped to dodge a subsequent triple slash if he winds up using it. It's a pretty intuitive dodge timing, nothing too complicated here. Alright, next up is one of Radahn's main combos. I would consider there to be kind of two principal big jumbo combos. This is the first one. It goes down, left, left, delayed aerial lift, downward plunge into the ground, a slight delay, and a small explosion as he lifts up. Master this combo in particular because it comes up a bunch, and it's also one of the best opportunities for punishment. Before he plunges down, you have a brief window to get in a light attack, but a light attack only. A heavy is too protracted and you'll get hit, but don't waste this opportunity, get that light attack in there. Then dodge the downward plunge outward, and then dodge inward for the explosion so that you're in range for a perfect counterattack. And on this one, you can actually use a nice heavy attack or a heavy Ash of War like Impaling Thrust, as I do here. So this one offers you two opportunities for counterattacking, one in the middle, one at the end, but it does require a little bit of timing, mastery, but you can see on the controller how to do that. His other big main jumbo combo is this one here that has a set of 4 moves in its base, but a possible 5th. Okay, so we go down with one sword from the left, then down the other way with one sword from the right. Then we have 2 sets of circumferential attacks with a delay between them. What's vital to note here is that this can be followed or not followed by a 5th move in which, after a slight delay, he comes down from the upper right with both swords. For this reason, it's important to take a brief moment after the first 4 moves to determine if that 5th move is coming or not before counterattacking. So the old adage of don't get greedy is especially pertinent on this combo. Alright, next up we're going to get into his flying gravity ball move. Now, as soon as you see the swords turn purple, first back up a bit. He's going to drag his swords on the ground, and all of this inflicts damage, so you can't evade both the initial plunge and the drag if you're at like a mid-ish range or way too close or something like that. So I always like to back up a little bit and then dodge the swords as he drags them upward. When he's in the air, you can either dodge or outrun and jump the balls. I typically prefer to dodge them, it's just easier for me, and if I do that, I'm just hitting dodge as soon as the first ball comes close to my character. Also another one like the gravity well jump that has a fairly generous window for dodging. I'm also giving you footage here of the run and jump strategy as well. Either of them is perfectly viable for this attack. Radahn also has a gravity suction attack. For this, it's telegraphed in the following way. Radahn will sort of bring his swords together and then they glow purple before gravity magic will suck you inward. This initial kind of inward suck will damage you slightly at range, not very much at all, very fractional chip damage, but if you're close enough that it actually sucks you in, you can be very vulnerable to a pernicious follow-up attack that does deal quite a bit of damage. Now, this can be dodged, this follow-up follow-up attack by just repeatedly dodging backwards, but the best thing is just to avoid it in the first case, and to do that, you just hit dodge as soon as he crosses his swords, and he will be unable to suck you inward. Next up, we're going to look at his jumps. So Radahn will flip up into the air and crash down. He can do this a single time, or he can land and then launch again to do another one. You want to dodge this as he approaches you sort of midway through the air. When he lands, though, don't immediately counterattack. You need to watch his body language to see if a second vault is forthcoming or if he's going to pivot to a different combo. What you can do once you get skilled at this when he lands is do one or two, really one light attack, because you can get off, if you're very fast, a light attack before he jumps back into the air. But if you do a heavy attack and he jumps back into the air, you are going to be screwed and you're going to wind up getting hit. So no heavy attacks until you're sure that he's done with jumping. Okay, now we have his Blood Flame attack combo, which is 2 moves and a delayed explosion. He's going to jab forwards at you and then swipe left, leaving a trail of Blood Flame, which will detonate soon after, but not immediately. So there's a little bit of a delay with the Blood Flame detonation, and there's a little bit of a delay between the first and second sword moves. Dodge inward for the first sword move to get out of range of the flame, and then you have 2 options. You can dodge or strafe. After a brief delay, if you want to dodge, just dodge leftwards, but make sure that you're hugging his body and not dodging leftward at an outward diagonal, or the Blood Flame will get you. The best thing to do to be the safest is if you properly dodge inward, you can actually just strafe him by sort of walking or running around his left-hand side after that first jab. You'll miss the second sword swipe if you do that, and you'll also be out of range of the Blood Flame explosion. So both options work for this attack. If you do the strafe, just be very conscious of your distance to his body. You really need to be hugging him because that Blood Flame trail is going to be following you on your opposite side, so don't be too far out for a strafe. Another melee attack that Radahn has is he sort of unfolds his swords that he's crossed into an X. He snaps them outward. You're going to hit dodge when the 2 have come together so that you're rolling while he snaps them outward. This is a good moment to pause and note that, in my experience, while Radahn can do the notorious triple slash at any point that he wants to, he's most liable to do it as a follow-up to this move. It's quite common to come after this move. So, as always, try to dodge to the left. Unfortunately, this move I find to be the hardest to dodge leftwards to a safe zone. You can, point your joystick to the left, but a lot of times you wind up just outside of the safe zone, so it's a bit tricky. The good news is that when you see this, you can prepare cognitively for the triple slash to likely be the next move. So you take the element of surprise out of it, and it's a little easier to deal with. If you're in neutral zone, you should be using the deflect tier. You can also use the backstep talisman that they've added to the DLC, but I think the most generous way of dealing with it is the deflect tier, and I'll get to that momentarily. Here we have a 3-hit combo. Radahn is going to come down overhead from the left and then do 2 slow-ish sword swipes in opposite directions. The timing here is dodge, dodge, dodge. Radahn's 2 slowest but also most devastating moves constitute this 2-hit combo. The timing of it can be quite tricky because it's very slow. I like to dodge when he's pretty close to me on that first downswing, and then do a healthy but not excessive pause for the second one, and you can see my pacing on the controller here. But that's my general approach. Wait until it gets, the first one gets fairly close to you, do a little bit of a delay, hit dodge the second time. Alright, here's the notorious triple slash, an execrable move. I have several videos just covering my thoughts about this contemptible piece of dog crap, but if you're doing a regular playthrough, honestly, you might just consider tanking the damage and writing it off. It's not terribly deleterious to your health, and it's a real pain to deal with. Obviously not an option on a no-hit run, so let's talk about that. You cannot roll through it at a neutral position unless you just so happen to be at a low elevation relative to him. The best bet, as I've said, is to consistently roll left such that you're able to dodge roll it from the leftward position. At neutral range, if you use the deflect tier, you can deflect this move. I recommend deflecting the first two and rolling the final move, as doing all three will vacuum up your stamina, leaving you in a vulnerable state afterwards. It sucks majorly, and let's hope it gets patched into oblivion soon. A note on the deflect tier is that it seems to recreate Sekiro timing, which is to deflect the moment the attack makes contact with you. Okay, here's a short combo of 2 hits. One comes up from the left towards the right, and then both come down from the upper right to the lower left. The only trick here is the slightly slow timing of the whole thing, but you can see how it's handled on the controller here, nothing too crazy. I want to talk a little bit about the phase transition and your kind of strategy for that, because there actually is quite a bit of wonkiness. From a sort of 10,000 foot view, the best way to minimize his health bar in phase 2 is not to stance break him in phase 1, but to time a poise break or a posture break such that it happens immediately after the phase transition. Doing so right before will cheat you of the benefit of the critical hit, because the phase transition will actually cut off critical hit damage. So rather than push the phase transition back as it does in most other fights, it will actually just cut that damage off and start the phase transition if you are inflicting the critical hit at around that time. An interesting and idiosyncratic thing about this fight is that this cutoff of damage does not happen with status affliction damage. So for example, if you inflict frostbite right before the transition, you'll actually get the full damage infliction, and it will push back the damage threshold for the phase transition. It's quite bizarre. It doesn't really make any sense why this happens for status affliction but not for critical hits, but that's the way that it appears to be. I simply learned by trial and error and doing this fight a billion times in my no-hit run roughly how many heavy attacks versus light attacks I needed to do in the first phase to trigger a stance break right after the transition as opposed to right before it. I can't really give you any scientific advice about this because it just wound up being a feeling, but you will be able to get there if you focus on that and do it enough times and really get to know the specific weapon that you're using. If you change weapons all the time, then it's going to be difficult. But for me, with Milady and with Impaling Thrust, I was able to just kind of intuitively start grasping the balance between those light attacks and those Impaling Thrust attacks to get it so that I am able to put a stance break as soon as phase 2 begins rather than right before it begins. The core combat of Phase 2 features the same moves as Phase 1, this time with the addition of lingering holy damage after each attack in the arena. The area at which the sword makes contact with the ground will light up with holy beams that inflict damage, so the idea here is to constantly roll all of these moves sideways rather than, for example, straight forward or straight backwards. Otherwise, the base moveset is the same. Note that the big ground slam combo is also the same, but the galaxy of holy projectiles can make it appear different. It's not though, so treat it the same, taking advantage of those same 2 windows for counterattacks, the light one and then the heavy one at the end, that we already discussed for Phase 1. Phase 2 will usually, but not always, open with this attack if you begin the phase at close range to Radahn. And this will happen unless you trigger the phase transition with a stance break, and I'll get to that momentarily. Assuming that it starts this way, run away backwards from it until you're out of range, and that range limit will be indicated by the wall of diaphanous light that you'll see. Be mindful afterwards of the pillars of holy damage that will populate after a delay, and these are going to be telegraphed by bright patches on the ground, so just don't stand in those and you will be fine. I also just want to quickly showcase what happens if you posture break Radahn in Phase 1 and cause him to phase transition from the critical hit. For whatever reason, you actually start in a different position all the way in the front of the arena while he's in that same position all the way in the back. The only major difference in how you handle this is that this time you're going to run forward to avoid the, giant holy orb attack rather than running backwards. Now we have the grab attack and Miquella's curse. The telegraph here is Radahn extending his swords outward as they scintillate with a holy buff. He'll crouch down, jump, and as he lands, he'll grab you. If he succeeds in grabbing you, Miquella will curse you. This imposes no damage on its own, but if it happens a second time, you die instantly. Dodge this as he's coming down for his landing. I like to dodge backwards so that I can see what he's going to get up to next. If you're feeling particularly bold, you can counterattack, but this is risky, and the best bet is to just let him do his next move. Now we're going to get into the moves that are unique to Phase 2, and these tend to be fairly difficult. The aerial gravity ball move begins the same way as in Phase 1, but it ends differently. So do the beginning of that with the dragging of the swords, the jumping in the air. Use the same strategy as in Phase 1 for that part. Then he's going to get in the air and he's going to launch the projectiles and then come down at you with clones, totaling 5 possible Radahn hits. Do not dodge this. Once he's in the air, start running straight forward. Continue to run as the balls eject toward you. Once they reach about midway between Radahn and you, turn to the right, and you can jump if necessary to evade them. Then continue running to the right for the first 4 clone attacks, which should miss you behind you. You then need to dodge the 5th one. You cannot outrun that one. It's vital to do all of this sideways, though. Do not run forward, do it sideways, because his final attack will propel a perpendicular line of holy damage forward. So ending up in front of him will inflict that damage, but that line will miss you if you're running to the side. Now, following this first holy damage attack, there will be a delay, and then there will be that same 360-degree carpet of holy pillars that we see in that ground slam combo. So mind the delay, dodge inward, and punish. An important thing to note about this combo is that the timing is going to vary a little bit depending on how far the clones are from you when they begin to land. If you see the clones super close to you, the first 4 clones very close behind you the whole time, you actually want to hit dodge on the 4th clone attack and not the 5th one, because there just won't be enough time if you do it on the 5th. But if there's a good, healthy distance between your back and his clone attacks, you can stick with hitting dodge right before he comes down for his 5th and final attack. Another unique move to Phase 2 is the double clone attack. It's often preceded by this disc of holy magic, but the telegraph for the double clone attack is that he's going to zip to the right before teleporting to you twice in a row. The timing is a little weird, but it's not too delayed. I hit dodge when he ends that rightward vault, and then I hit dodge again fairly quickly, but not with the utmost speed. It's dodge as opposed to something like dodge. While the gravity ball attack featured 5 Radahns, this next one features 4. The way of handling it, though, is not dissimilar. The telegraph is a launch straight upward without any accompanying projectiles. I run to the right and dodge that 4th attack. It can be followed up with an attack, or not followed up at all. He can just stand there for a minute. So be mindful of what he does as soon as the clone attack ends, and let that dictate how you respond, how you punish, or how you don't punish it. But do be aware that there are a number of options for how he can follow this up, ranging from melee attacks to just sort of doing nothing for a few seconds. This teleportation move, where he just sort of projects himself forward, is weird. It looks much more dangerous than it is, though. You just need to dodge it once, and then you're fine for the rest of it, even though it might appear like it should be inflicting damage the whole time. In fact, you can actually strafe the whole thing too without even dodging, but I never bother with this. It's so easy to dodge, and a single dodge doesn't consume that much stamina, so to me strafing just is never worth the risk in a no-hit context. But that does exist, and you can look up online how to do it. Okay, here's that delayed holy disc we previously saw at the start of the double clone attack, but here it is on its own, which it more often than not it comes on its own. The timing on this one was always super filthy for me, and it took me forever to master. He's going to launch this disc, and you need to wait for it to reach you. Then he's going to do this sort of semi-delayed sword swipe. That swipe can be by itself, or it can be followed up with a second swipe coming from the opposite direction. So the key here is not to counterattack instantly after the first sword attack, because another one may well be coming, and a heavy attack after that first one will get you hit if it is indeed inbound. Part of what makes that attack so confounding is that he also has an instantaneous holy disc. This stretches across the arena all at once, so it requires immediate rather than delayed dodging. The telegraph is how he positions his swords at a right angle to each other before ejecting the disc. Dodge at once when you see that coming without delay. It might take some time to get used to, but you'll eventually learn the visual cues that distinguish the two discs from each other. This last move that we're going to cover is probably my least favorite other than the triple slash, and that's this enormous phase 2 combo. You can barely see it with all of the visual clutter, which is quite frustrating, so learning the timing intuitively is just the best way to approach it, unfortunately. He'll start by putting his swords overhead in a T shape, illuminated with a holy buff. He'll launch forward with 2 attacks in quick succession. We have a delay, and then we have a third and fourth attack in quick succession. A very brief delay ensues, and then he vaults upward, attacking with a 5th sword swipe as he does this upward jump. He'll then land, which causes the arena to light up with holy pillars. So this beast of a combo comprises 6 moves in total. To handle it, you want to dodge the first attack earlier than you might think, so that you have time for dodging the second attack. Pause briefly, then dodge again. The third and fourth should be evadable with a single dodge, but you can dodge twice if you do 3 dodges quickly in a row. If you do a single dodge for moves 3 and 4, you need a slight delay to dodge the upward swing, and then dodge as you see him coming down for the landing, and that will take care of both his landing and the holy pillars as well. So that should be all of his moves. I apologize if I forgot 1 or 2 of them. Let me know in the comments if there's one that I didn't cover, and I'll try to explain it or make a follow-up video. But yeah, there's a lot, so I did my best. Yeah, thank you for watching. Please do, like I said, leave a comment. Tell me about your experience for fighting Radahn. Also give fellow viewers your advice for this fight if it diverges from mine at all. I'm sure the more input, the better it will be for everybody who's trying to tackle the final DLC boss.